This is a film about the right of a people to freedom and the power of the human spirit to resist against overwhelming odds. It's the story of Burma, once known as the Golden Land. On the surface, everything appears serene. It's a country of extraordinary beauty and gracious people. But Burma is also a secret country, isolated for the past 34 years since a brutal dictatorship seized power. The assault on its people all but forgotten. To tell their story, we had to go undercover. What we found was a land of fear.
People who were carrying the posters and flags, they were shot and then they all died immediately on the spot.
9 students were badly tortured and they were sent to prison for 7 years just for singing a freedom song.
Those who have already been in prison, they know what it is like to be in a Burmese prison, and they know that any day they're liable to be put back there, and yet they do not give up.
The generals who crushed democracy in Burma have ruled with a regime so harsh, bloody and uncompromising that the parallels with Indonesia and East Timor are striking. More than 1 million people have been forced from their homes, and according to the United Nations, untold thousands have been massacred, tortured, and subjected to a modern form of slavery. Burma, says Amnesty International, is a prison without bars. In 1988, the year before the democracy movement in China was crushed so publicly in Tiananmen Square, as many as 10,000 people were killed here by their government in a matter of days. The outside world knew little about this. The difference was the absence of television cameras. This film is being made in secret as the regime attempts to cover its crimes with the help of foreign investors and by declaring 1996 the year of the tourist. The history of modern Burma reaches back through the Second World War and 100 years of British imperial rule. With a population of 45 million, it has a natural wealth perhaps unequaled in Asia, oil and gas and vast teak forests. Renamed Myanmar by its military rulers, Burma has been turned into one of the world's poorest countries. And as we discovered, and will reveal later in this film, it's also a country where slave labor and child labor are common. To the British who colonized Burma in the early 19th century, the Golden Land was always a sideshow to its rule over India. However, under a guise of benevolence familiar to Indian nationalists, the same myths applied. The British were bringing civilization, not empire building. Rudyard Kipling wrote a famous popular song that romanticized Mandalay, a town he never saw, and which was then being stripped bare of its teak forests, leaving vast dust bowls. Fortunes were earned by the British exporters of Burma's rice and precious stones. In the 1930s, companies were making profits of £12 million, a huge amount in today's terms. The oil fields became a byword for expatriate wealth, and these interests were protected by an imperial army.
Present military mentality is conditioned by the colonial period. It's like a colonial army. occupying the country. They behave like a corporate body, serving its own interests. So they don't recognize the people's representative or the will of the people, because they themselves, they regard it as separated from and superior to the populace. That tradition derived from the colonial period.
The movement for independence from Britain began in the 1930s among the students and monks. The national hero was a young army officer, Aung San, the father of Nobel Peace Prize winner Suu Kyi. During the Second World War, Aung San and his comrades exploited the Japanese occupation to win independence. But in 1948, as independence was about to be granted, Aung San was assassinated. His name is revered in Burma today. What was unique about the movement he began and which led to democratic governments in the post-war years was its quality of Buddhism, socialism and democracy. The ideas of Marx, Nehru and Voltaire were adapted. Marx was virtually transformed into a disciple of Buddha. This flowering of democratic socialism coincided with a period of turmoil as Burma's ethnic peoples demanded autonomy. But in 1962, the army stepped in and seized power. Its leader was a Stalin-like figure called Ne Win.
He ruled the country like Stalin ruled Russia through KGB. So he set up his intelligence apparatus, which he used as his eyes and ears. So he sees the country through this apparatus. So this apparatus become a government within the government.
I think he's a control maniac. He's one of the most extraordinary, contradictory characters that one could ever come across. One who changed a good deal. I think in his earlier years he was a playboy. In the 60s he suddenly changed as a result of perhaps of his advisors. He changed his whole policy and became a very rigorous, authoritarian, puritanical, for other people anyway, kind of guy, and decided that Burma should be taken away from all kinds of foreign influence.
That hypocrisy in Ne Win is fascinating, isn't it? Because he was the gambler, the man who liked racing and turned up at Ascot now and then he banned it all for the Burmese.
Yes, I think he may have got cheated by a bookie at Ascot.
Ne Win imposed a silence on Burma. He abolished its lively free press and a strict censorship control newspapers, radio, books and films, isolating one of the most literate societies in Asia. The new rules stated, any incorrect ideas and opinions which do not accord with the times are banned. These torn and tattered books in a Rangoon market are the remains of free expression in Burma. Even our filming of them attracted the attention of military intelligence. Of course, rumour has been impossible to ban, especially when the subject is the dictator himself.
When his soothsayer warned him there might be a bloodbath, he would stand in front of a mirror and he would trample on dead meat or something to simulate the blood, and then he would shoot himself in the mirror. And having done that, this would avert the possibility of assassination.
Of all the world's megalomaniacs, perhaps only Ne Win is ruled by astrology and superstition. The best example of this was the day he bankrupted the population. Without warning, he cancelled most of Burma's currency, replacing it with banknotes that added up to or included the figure 9. According to his chief astrologer, 9 was his lucky number. The Burmese weren't quite so lucky. As most people here keep their savings in cash, most of them were ruined.